everybody. I'm here with Miss Jacober, and we are here to discuss Aboriginal identity and otherness. So, Kristen, how is Aboriginal identity constructed in Canada?
Well, Courtney, Aboriginal identity in Canada is outlined in an article by Jean-Paul Risto entitled Aboriginal Identity, the Need for Historical and Cultural Perspectives. Within this, it shows how the identity is formed and how the Aboriginal community represents and feels about their identity and the impact that this has on their daily lives. The term identity is often expressed popularly in academic journals as fixed across time and is also has a fixed nature. The fact that the way that Aboriginals have been identified through government acts such as the Indian Act is a static and unchanging definition of the word Indian. The act has also been the source of many problems for the survival of their culture.
Interesting. So, what is the difference between identity and identifying?
Okay, well, Risto expresses that identity implies fixedness, that the things that make an Indian remain the same and should be the same as things associated with European Indianness and the time at first contact. Identity places power in the observer who observes Aboriginal people from the outside and define them, giving them an identity within conceptual and legal boundaries. Identifying, on the other hand, is a shift to the self. It's a process of being and becoming what one is in that moment. Within this, it creates morphing and salient components of an Aboriginal identity to be expressed as the person feels. Identity to Risto is thought to transcend history and social situations, whereas identifying is situational and historical.
Wow, this is really making sense. So, Kristen, how does this limit the Aboriginal groups in Canada?
Well, Courtney, it limits them in quite a few different ranges here. The continuation of being identified in immobile nature creates constrictiveness in colonizing representations. The representations are noted in the way that the observer understands the observed, as well as the way the defined come to understand themselves. Otherness is also created by the gaze. The gaze is that the observers portray, as well as the subjectivity of what the gaze has meant to the observed. Otherness to Stephen Rose can be explained as a social relation because it is an attempt to legitimize a socially produced situation of fundamental disadvantage by giving to it the veneer of a natural, biological, inflexible fact. The notion of race holding also becomes in place as otherness is created in order to justify or camouflage a person's fears, weaknesses, or inadequacies, and that's according to Shelby Steele.
Makes sense. So, can you relate this article to the chapter on risk and otherness in Lupton's text?
Yes, you bet I can. The binary relationship between us and them, the observer and the observed, creates a dichotomy of power. Certain groups and people are seen as being risky and require control and manipulation through institutions or individuals, as Lupton has said. Otherness is a product of differences and strangeness. Otherness is dangerous because it confounds order and control. The Aboriginal populations in Canada are very legally bound. They are confined to separate and private land use areas. They're entwined and structured in monetary assistance programs, and by definition, the government is staging the Aboriginal peoples to be a risky society. In turn, this knowledge creates an identity and identifying crisis and a self-fulfilling prophecy within the population. This prophecy is especially noted within education, as schools have always expected them to do poorly, and that they have internalized this message to do poorly. This, however, only looks at one side of the coin and identifies the forces to pressure them to do poorly. There are margins of choice, however, and there's irony rested in this choice, as it takes power for positive change, and it takes that away from the students and places it right back into the institutions that have first failed them. Risto continues that the Aboriginal community is regulated by limitations on personal mobility, language, and participation in cultural activities. There's law set to define a people. This produces risk in the Aboriginal community that they're perpetually under surveillance and order by the dominant group. If they do not wish to assimilate or practice genocide, they are caught within legality and definitions. If they do assimilate their culture, or partake in actions that are not identified to the observer as Indian, they are at risk of being explained, or they're at risk of being explained that they are voluntarily and essentially willingly giving up their culture and their aboriginality.
Thank you, Kristen, for enlightening us on that topic.